Perfect. Hi, everyone. Today I'll tell you about a spontaneous trip I took this weekend with some friends. And the purpose of it was literally to get lost in Colorado and Wyoming. It was meant to be a completely spontaneous trip in that we originally just wanted to show up at the airport and ask the gate agents or the flight attendants or the airline attendants to just give us three tickets to the cheapest city in, let's say, the western half of the United States. But unfortunately, they didn't really allow us to do that when we called them a couple weeks in advance for a trial run. So instead, we had a funny process where we each picked a random location on the map using this map finding tool on the internet. And then we took a randomly weighted average of those three coordinates to find where we should actually go. And that randomly weighted average coordinate turned out to be near Denver, Colorado. So we were like, all right, let's fly to Denver, Colorado, and then we'll spontaneously plan from there. No more planning beyond the actual flights. So here's the actual trip itinerary that we ended up following. We landed in Denver, Colorado first, and we stayed there overnight for one night. So the homes icons that I've put here are the locations where I actually stayed overnight. We then drove the next morning to a city called Fort Morgan, which is actually where the randomly weighted average dart fell. Fort Morgan is a very random city, but we actually made, in my opinion, the most out of that city. We got almost everything there is to get out of it in about one day. And then we went to Fort Collins on that same day, just for a quick stop for dinner and to explore the city. And then we went to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where we spent a full night and then the next day as well. And overall, this was a very enjoyable trip, and I learned a lot about each of these cities. But what I learned most is that it takes very little planning to actually have an enjoyable trip. And for me, at least, having these spontaneous experiences allows me to have the most fun without worrying about sticking to an itinerary or following some kind of milestone checklist of here's all the things I need to see. So I've really enjoyed this type of traveling, and I hope to do it more in the future. The first stop, like I said, was Denver. And we did a few things in Denver, but I just chose a couple pictures to point out. Denver has a lot of cool street art in the downtown district. So on the left side, this is a block called Dairy Block. I'm not entirely sure why it's called Dairy Block because there aren't any milk stores or anything like that. But there is this really cool artwork with the milk splashing down on the ground, which I thought was pretty interesting. And this is just on a normal alleyway kind of road that you would see in downtown. There's also a really nice bar that we went to in downtown with probably the best cocktails I've ever had. And Denver prices are generally lower than the Bay Area, but this bar especially was almost the same price as San Francisco. So I figured it would be high quality, but it actually exceeded my expectations. So I highly recommend this bar. I don't actually remember the name of it because it was just a sort of like hidden away bar in the alley, but that was a pretty fun experience. One thing we did the next morning in Denver was going to a Meow Wolf art exhibit. So I didn't know what Meow Wolf was, but for those of you who also don't know, it's an art installation and immersive art experience company that makes these installations around the country. And they're very elaborate, very detailed, very large art exhibits. This one in Denver is called Convergence Station. It's quantum mechanics and sci-fi themed, and it occupies over 90,000 square feet. So these are just two pictures, but there's literally hundreds of pictures that my friends and I took exploring this space. And what really impressed me the most is not just the variety of artwork that you see in there. So there's sculptures, there's paintings, or these plaster in Paris sort of figurines that are all over the place. But there's also very detailed storylines about a fictitious sci-fi world that is sort of underpinning all of the art you see here. So I didn't expect any of this to be organized. I thought it was all very random and interesting to look at, but there's actually a deeper thematic relation too, which I thought was very impressive. And I actually think it's really impressive how much effort the designers put into making all this art. So I highly recommend going to them if you ever have the chance. This is the next stop, which is Fort Morgan, Colorado. It's about a 90-minute drive away from Denver, Colorado, to the east, to the northeast. And it's a very small town. There's only one real main road. It's called Main Street. And there's a few side roads that come off of Main Street. And there's sort of like farmland that protrudes away from the center of the city. One thing that was really funny is that the first stop we made was the library to just get a paper map, because one of the rules for this trip was we can't use our phones to navigate. We have to navigate organically by either calling people and asking them for directions or finding paper maps on our own. So we stopped in the public library to get some idea of where we were and where to get around the city and where to go next. But one thing that was funny is that the library actually has a museum attached to it that tells you all about the history of the town or the city. So it's really interesting because Fort Morgan was actually one of the first mass producers of sugar. And the reason is because they grow sugar beets as their main crop, or at least they did in the late 1800s. And so there was a very detailed diagram explaining the chemical process of how beets are processed into a pulp, which is then refined and extracted to produce granulated sugar. And that was the main industry they had for a long time. Now there's a lot of grain silos and different industries in agriculture, but it's still a very farm-based town. But the library was very interesting to see all of that. And the librarian was gracious enough to lend us a photocopier to make a photocopy of these maps so we could take them with us on our road trips. The left is a picture of me riding in the back of our truck in Fort Morgan. I wanted to get a pickup truck specifically because I felt like it would, jibe with the Colorado/Wyoming theme. But what's really cool in Colorado is that if you're above the age of 16, you can legally ride in the back of a pickup truck as long as all four sides are enclosed. And you don't need any, there's no seatbelt, so you can just ride there legally with no exceptions. And I really wanted to just drive down a straight road or be driven down a straight road because this road went on for 4 miles, just straight until it basically ends in an unpaved section. And so initially we actually walked this entire section in the morning just to talk some thoughts out. My friends are like, I chose these friends because we're all very intellectually curious. So we would tell each other brain teasers and other problems like that and just walk down the road in 90-degree heat while cars would just drive past us thinking, what are these people doing? But then I also got driven down there on the back of this truck just for the experience of it. One thing that was really funny in Fort Morgan is that we went to a local pub or I guess a bar on the first night and we made friends with the bartender. And she told us that the next day was the town's first ever Renaissance fair. And this video is of a fake sword fight that is sort of like the highlight of this Renaissance fair. So they had little trinkets and exhibits that were selling items that people had made, but they also had this entire theatric show planned out where essentially like the bartender was playing this princess whose hand was being fought over in this fictitious kingdom. And I thought it was pretty cool that the entire town gathered there and set this up. And it was honestly an enjoyable experience to just stop by and watch this. After Fort Morgan, we then departed for Cheyenne, Wyoming. And Cheyenne itself is a pretty small city. It's only about 60,000 people. And fun fact, Wyoming as a state has a population density of only 6 people per square mile. There's not many people in Wyoming. But we actually found a lot of interesting things to do outside the immediate Cheyenne metropolitan area. One of the things we literally stumbled upon was this missile alert facility about 40 miles north of Cheyenne. We actually we got out to the wrong direction of the freeway going from Cheyenne, intending to go to a different location. And we saw a sign saying missile alert facility up ahead. And it had a phone number. So we called the phone number and we asked them what exit to take off the freeway to get to this place. And we asked them, like, are there tours available? What times are you open? And we were lucky enough to actually go there when it was open and a tour was available for us. This is actually a Cold War nuclear missile launch facility. So I didn't know this, but I read more about it. And apparently during the early 60s, we installed a lot of nuclear missile launch sites in Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and Montana. The reason being, those states are the closest to launch missiles to the Soviet Union because they fly over the North Pole. And they're also far away from densely populated metropolitan areas in the US. So it's more likely than not that they won't be the first strike targets in a Soviet attack or retaliatory strike. But this was a really cool site. The site was shut down in 2005, so it's not operational anymore, but it's turned into a museum. And it consists of this capsule that's about 30 or 40 feet underground with a 4-foot thick concrete sheet. And inside that 4 feet thick concrete sheet is a launch station where these airmen would essentially man the station and be ready for threat of a Soviet attack. So we were actually able to go down this capsule and see all of the contraptions there. And the picture on the right is the actual desk station of the deputy commander who would turn one of the missile keys responsible for activating the launch sequence. And it's actually a very complicated sequence, but he and the main commander would have to turn their keys at the same time, and would also have to synchronize their key turning to the key turning of a different missile site. And the way all of this was synchronized was using atomic clocks, which were introduced in the 50s and were available in the 60s for these sites to use. And there's a lot more of cool engineering and marvels that I learned here, but it's too much for one speech. So I'll conclude with the final interesting part of Wyoming, which was the state park called Kurt Gowdy State Park. This is close to the Wyoming-Colorado border, and we passed it on the way back. And it's over 50 miles of trails and biking areas and kayaking, but we just went to this popular destination called Hidden Falls, which is this waterfall tucked away behind the mountains. And it was a really nice hike. There's a lot of interesting animals like chipmunks and a lot of cool birds that you'll find there. And it's weird because initially when I saw the water on the right side, I thought it was very dirty water because it looks very muddy. But actually, it's just the color of the sand underneath, and the water itself is very clean and clear. So this state park is very nice. It is very cheap to actually enter and travel around. So overall, Wyoming actually had a lot more interesting unplanned destinations than we expected. So that's the summary of my trip. And there's a lot more that I wanted to talk about, but it's too much to fit in one speech. But I like this idea of spontaneous traveling. And if any of you think it's exciting too, I highly recommend you try it out at some point. Thank you.